bunged up. So today is International Children's Care Day, and I had an opportunity, I think, while I was sitting there to just look at some of the projects that are being done around the world in the different countries that ICC does their work, besides the UK and Romania, the Zambia, the DRC, which we know has a big problem. It has been in war for time immemorial. And Mexico, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. So there are many places where the charity is trying to impact. When I was thinking about this, I was looking at what it is that we as a church are famous for, right? And I know many of us can say, if I ask you, what's the Adventist Church famous for? What are the things that we're most famous for? Health? Yes. Singing? Yes, we are famous for our singing, our music. True. Somebody sent me a very funny picture. I should have shared it to you. And it's a picture of a head, an Adventist head. And it was a brain, an Adventist brain, and it had segments. One section was choir practice. Next section was Soya. And then the one bit was Soya, choir practice, suits, Ellen G. White. I think they left out a few things there, though, because we're known for being vegetarians everywhere you are. Or if you're in my country, if I'm from Zimbabwe originally, if they say I'm Adventist, they say, oh, those people who don't drink tea. You know, so they know us as caffeine-free people. And being vegetarian, we're known for our schools too. We used to have really good schools. I'm not sure about now, but we used to have really good schools once upon a time. And people would want to send their children to our schools. We also are known for, interestingly, you didn't say keeping the Sabbath, which is our main distinction, right? Between us and everybody else is that we keep the Sabbath, and most people don't. Some people do, who are not necessarily in part of our denomination. There are quite a lot of churches nowadays who do. But, you know, that's our main distinction. But we're also known as the people of the rules. You know, we have the truth. We like to keep the truth. And I thought about this, and I was wondering, with everything that we are known for and all the good things, the hospitals are great. It's great that we're healthy. It's great that we want to be healthy. It's great that we had good schools. And it's good that we actually have, you know, a good reputation as people who sing. Whenever they're looking for people to come and do music, I've had the privilege in my previous life of actually singing for my former country president on a few occasions, and with the choir that I used to sing with. So we have that as a privilege, and as a church, we're very well known for some of these really good things. And then I thought to myself, but what really matters to God? What really matters to God? What matters to God apart from us keeping the Sabbath and all the rules and regulations that we have as a church and everything that we do that's right, all the food that we don't eat, shouldn't eat? I made a discovery that giraffe is kosher, actually, while I was away, because I was having these discussions about what to eat and what not to eat with the people I was with, because they're like, oh, you're too fussy, you should just eat whatever. And do you know that giraffe is kosher? Do you know that giraffe is kosher? It is. You can actually eat a giraffe. You can. And yes, because if you want to know what's kosher or not, go to the Jewish websites, right? They'll tell you. And they discovered only recently, it's actually in the Telegraph, it was in the news, that giraffe can be eaten. It not only has all the things that cows have, but the milk test, it also passed the milk test. Apparently, when you heat up the milk of a giraffe, it curdles like cow's milk. So it's exactly like a cow, only longer, right? And longer neck and everything. It does the same thing, chews cud, split hoofs, everything. So you could have giraffe steak if you wanted. I'm not suggesting that you go do it, but it's a possibility. And it's something that we're very careful about. We don't want to eat the wrong things, and we don't want to make sure that we eat the right thing exactly, and so on. But as we worry about these things, and we forget that, I don't know if God is so concerned about whether we're going to eat giraffe or not, as much as he's concerned about what we do and how we treat each other. And I think that's something that we've always had an issue with as a church. is we talk a lot about so many things, but when it comes down to it, the biggest complaint that we have as people amongst ourselves is that we lack compassion for one another. And that's the bottom line. Now, I looked at what is important in the Bible and what God requires most. Our memory text that we read was talking about Rahab, and then the other one was from Psalms 41. But I want to read a verse, James 1, verse 27. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep yourself unspotted from the world. So yes, we have to do the right thing. But first and foremost, we have to visit the fatherless and the widows. That is pure religion. So keeping the Sabbath is great. Having vegetarian cooking classes is fantastic. I've done those vegan ones. Having great music and the ability to sing, and if we could sing like angels, that's awesome. Having all those fantastic hospitals like Loma Linda, Florida Hospital, amazing place. But pure religion as defined by God is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. And I know we read this verse a lot, we know it. And many times we've looked at it and then we've thought to ourselves, yeah, I've done that. You know, I've given to the poor. I've made sure that I have, you know, occasionally at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, I set aside something for the poor. And now I just want to ask you, how many of us know who the widows and fatherless are in our communities here? I'm sure we know those who are in the church, right, who the widows are in the church. The verse says to visit them. Now, I could spend a bit of time analyzing what that actually means, but that's not the verse I'm going to focus on. But how many of us actually have made an effort to find out in Aylesbury who takes care of the widows? And who takes care, if they all, is it just the government, and that's okay? And the people who are fatherless, the orphans, the poor, the homeless, the people that don't have as much as us, do we actually know the numbers? Do we know where they live? Do you know where they sit under the bridge? Which bridge do people who are homeless actually go and keep in the night, in winter? How many of us have actually taken the time to make note of that? In Micah 6, we're reminded that what God prefers, what he likes, what is good is for us to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with our God. I want us to make a shift away from the things that we mostly consider as Adventists that are seemingly important to us, which are very good. It's nice for us to come to church and do all these things. But where is our heart? And what is it that matters the most to God? Not necessarily what matters the most to us, but what matters the most to God. And if you look at the Bible, there's so many texts. I was having a conversation with one of my friends who's in Zimbabwe. He's a pastor, and we were talking about certain things, you know, and I said to him, I think you've done enough studying. And he said, why? Because he's done his master's. I said, you don't need to do a PhD. And then he says, oh, you know, Paul was very well learned and he could make these discussions about righteousness by faith. I said, okay, I think we've all come to the conclusion, the right conclusions about what that means and what Romans is talking about and Galatians is talking about. What more do you want to know? It says, well, it's very good for us to know these things. And I say to him, for me, as far as I'm concerned, you don't need a high degree to understand the basic requirements of God. When you are now grounded in the right faith, you will understand that God's requirements are very, very simple. And righteousness by faith is truly what it is, what we act out as a result of what we believe. That's what it is. And what we act out as a result of us knowing and believing God to be a God who loves mercy, who loves justice, who loves the poor, who likes to look after the ones that are oppressed, to be a voice. Because we're having this discussion about, should we speak out about what's happening in my country, in Zimbabwe? That was last week. So the church has always had a stance to stand back from social issues and look at them and classify them as second coming issues. Jesus is coming again. This is a symptom of the second coming of Jesus. The poor, we're always going to have them. That's what Jesus said. So why should we do anything about it? After all, we're always going to have the poor amongst us. And if Jesus is coming tomorrow or next week and he said there'll be war, there'll be famine, there'll be pestilence, there'll be earthquakes, there'll be all these disasters, we look at them very, very indifferently, in the sense that our thinking and our mind, this is my thinking, it may not be true of you. This is what I think, what I see, that sometimes we look at what's going on in the world because Jesus said it would happen, because it was part of the second coming, or it's part of the state of the world today, and we distance ourselves and detach ourselves from actually trying to make a difference in that particular problem, because we see it as just a natural consequence of what's going on and what's in the world. So he was saying to me, and I had become upset with him, because in the midst of all these things that are happening, you want to send me the Sabbath school lesson. We had a network blockage in my country for days. People were not allowed to use the internet, right? Couldn't use social media. There was no access outside the world for us to know what was going on while the violence was going on. And then in the little window that this person had to, because they would open the internet every now and again and allow, I don't know what, to happen. Oh, they needed to pay people, and they need people to use, because there's no cash in the country, so you need cards and you need the internet to be able to pay and buy stuff. So occasionally they allow people to do that. So in that minute, you send me a verse about something ecclesiastical, which is fantastic. It's awesome that I can know what Daniel meant about this and that. But in the seconds that you have an opportunity to share with me what's actually going on in the way you are, and I'm asking, how are people doing? What's going on the ground? What can we do to help? And the response was, well, you know what, I'm a bit divided about how we should respond to things as Adventists. What is our stance to social justice? What is our stance to what's going on? Okay, should we vote? Should we distance ourselves from that? Now, I'm bringing this home to talk about when we look at, I say to him, well, what did Jesus do? What does the Bible ask us to do? The reason, one of the major reasons why the Israelites were taken into captivity was because of poor social systems. There was a lot of injustice in Israel. Bribery, murder, violence, and not looking after the poor, not looking after the strangers. Those were the things that God was upset with them about. The fact that they neglected their duty, their social duties, and people didn't care. They didn't care about what God cared about. And Jesus said to them, because you've practiced violence, nobody cares. People do things and they disregard, they walk over the poor, they look at people who have nothing, and they mistreat them. The way people were treating each other, now we would like to blame people at the top. We like to blame our country presidents, we like to blame the government, and we like to say, it's their fault, they're poor people on earth. But our requirement as individuals, God does not require it of the British government. He requires it of you and of me. And when he is meting out judgment, when Jesus said, because I like to look at the Bible, and I always tell people, don't worry, don't look for answers elsewhere. Just see how God has always conducted himself. He is consistent. And if God is consistent about this one thing, he did not like whether you are in Israel or you are in Babylon, whether you are an Egyptian, whether you are a Syrian, whether you are an Ethiopian. If you look at the book of Jeremiah, when he's talking about all those different countries, the reason why God was upset with the Syrians and the Babylonians and everybody else was for the same reasons. Because they neglected social justice. They neglected to do what was good. Even when they didn't have God as their God. They didn't believe in the God that the Jews did, but they knew what was right and what was wrong. They knew that you have to look after each other. They knew that it's important to take care of the poor. They knew that bribery was wrong because God put it in all of us to know what is right and how to look after our social relationships. That is very, very important. So God says, this is what matters to me the most. And so I want you to do something. I want you to consider the poor. And he says, Blessed is he who considers the poor. And I looked at what that word considers mean. It's in Greek, it's sakar or Hebrew, which means to be circumspect. To be circumspect is to take particular attention, to take note, to be prudent about doing your business. So when you do something with consideration, you are someone who's giving particular attention to. So you're making a deliberate effort to set aside time, money, or doing something intentionally so that you can help those who are poor. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. How many of us intentionally say, who are the poor? How much am I getting paid? How much am I going to put aside to help the poor, to help the orphans, to help those who are less privileged than me? How many of us are taking deliberate consideration? Not just when you come to church and there's ICC day and like, oopsie, I don't know how much money I have in my pocket now. Let me see. What's the change? What's the change from when I went shopping yesterday so that I could get the Sabbath ready, prepare for the Sabbath and be on time and look good. So let me see, if I have 50p, they're doing a collection. Maybe it's a communion day. In my church where I was in Ireland, on communion, we always collected for the homeless. And so it's communion day. I happen to be here. And by the way, I did know on communion day that we do collect for the homeless, but I didn't come prepared. I don't have anything. I have not considered what it takes for the people who do what they do, like ICC, to actually run their businesses. I've not considered what it takes for the government to feed the homeless. I've not considered what it takes for the Samaritans to run that service, that online service to help those who are depressed, who are suicidal. Have I taken time to consider how much money is required by the world to feed the people who cannot feed themselves, people in disaster places, people in earthquakes, people who are in war zones, children who are going without food every single day? Have I taken the time to consider the poor? And I think that's very important. And what it takes is, of course, I consider myself. You know, I wake up in the morning, I will go and wash my face, I brush, I shower, I look at my face, I do my face, I think it's, you know, maybe needs a bit of this, a bit of that, because it's about me. If it's about me, I will take the time. If I have to feed my stomach, I will consider what to eat. I open the fridge and I look and I say, ooh, I need to go shopping because it's about me. I look at my wardrobe and I look and see, do I have winter clothes? Do I have a hat? Do I have a scarf? Oopsie, no, I need to go shopping because it's about me. Now, we have to consider those who cannot, even if they did consider it. There's a child in the world who will not open a wardrobe and look and see what choice they have that day for shoes, for a jumper, for clothes. And some of those children are in cold places. Some of those children are in places where winter bites. And they will not be able to go in there and think, does my hat match my scarf? They don't have those considerations because they just don't have anything. And so as I consider myself and all the wonderful things that I have, the Bible is saying to me, blessed is he that considers the poor. And watch this. Now, why is this so important? Why is this so important? We do not know, unless we've been in that place, what an impact someone can make in your life by considering you. You do not know. Joey, I'm going to ask you to come back and don't go because I'm going to ask you to play the video now in a minute. Please, you do not know and you do not realize, unless you've been in that situation, what a difference your money can make, your consideration can make, your £5 a month, your £10 a month will make to a child or a person in that environment. And I want to ask Joey to show us that video. And it's only 6 minutes, but I wanted my 6 minutes of this sermon to go to that, and then we're going to close What difference can it make when you consider somebody else, not related to you, not your family, not yourself, and want to help them? What difference can it make? Volume.
Went from battered wife to fashion tycoon.
This is so extraordinary.
And what's bringing together a Secretary of State, an Oscar winner, 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning writers, and our viewers? Find out how much power we really have. Next.
I have heard everything, I think, over the last 24 years. But the story I'm about to share with you is my favorite. You talk about vision boards. We've done that on this show. We've talked about the law of attraction here on this show. But this is the most incredible story of manifesting a dream that I have ever heard. Guaranteed. It's going to knock your socks off and make you believe in your own power of manifestation. Okay? Listen to this. We traveled halfway around the world to introduce you to a woman named Tererai Trent.
My story is not about me, but it's about what can come out of my story. This is my birthplace. This is my home.
Tererai Trent grew up in this remote, rural village in Zimbabwe. She was raised in a hut with no running water or electricity and little hope for the future. She traveled back here to tell us her remarkable story.
They're saying, work hard, work hard. Now we welcome Tererai. She has worked hard.
It was a homecoming for an unlikely hero. To these women, Tererai Trent has become a symbol of hope.
In my village, girls have no hopes. Only boys have the opportunity to go to school. This is where my brother went to school, and this is the place that I have always wanted to be when I was young. And I would always cry and say, Papa, why don't you just allow me to go just for one day? I just wanted to sit on a desk and, raise my hand and say something. As a little girl, I was desperate to learn. I was secretly doing my brother's homework, and I learned to read and write from my brother's books. This used to be my desk for doing my brother's homework.
Eventually, the teacher uncovered their secret and realized Tererai was the one who was always doing her brother's homework and begged Tererai's father to let her come to school. But after only 2 terms, she was married off at just 11 years old. By the time she was 18, she was a mother to 3 children.
When my husband realized that I wanted to have an education, he would beat me. I have nightmares of that time of my life.
In 1991, a woman named Jo Luck from an organization called Heifer International visited Tererai's village.
She found us sitting in a circle, and then she started asking us what our hopes and what our dreams. And I remember very clearly saying, my name is Tererai, and I want to go to America to have an education, and I want to have a BSc, I want to have a master's, and I want to have a PhD. And she just looked at me. If you desire those things, it is achievable. Write those things in your heart, whatever you desire.
Then my mother said, write those dreams down on paper and bury them. And if you truly believe in those dreams, then you'll see them grow and grow and grow. Cover those dreams with a rock, because that rock will always call you wherever you are in the world.
Tererai wrote down her dreams that day, placed them in a scrap of tin, and buried them under a rock in the pasture where she herded cattle as a young girl.
This is the rock that has called me back. It was like I had my own secret, and the rock was keeping my secret for me, and it did over the years. There it is.
My mother said, you are the last person to break this vicious circle of poverty, and I want you to do that. And I did it. I did it.
Oh, yes, she did. Oh, yes, she did. So, just listen to this. Just listen to this. Her first dream that she wrote down on that piece of paper when she was a little girl was to live in the United States. In 1998, Tararai moved to Oklahoma with her husband and 5 children. Dream number 2 that she wrote down. Just 3 years later, Tararai, after moving to the United States, earned her bachelor's degree in agricultural education. In 2003, Tararai's husband was deported for continuing to abuse her, but she still achieved dream number 3, earning her master's degree in just 2 years. And today, Tararai is happily remarried, and before the end of this year, Tararai will have made dream number 4 that she wrote down also come true. She will be awarded her PhD. Unbelievable. Please welcome the soon-to-be Dr. Tararai Trent.
Right, thank you, Joy. I wanted to show this video because somebody shared this video with me, a different version of it this week, and about something else, and I thought it was very appropriate for today because of the fact that we never know what an impact the changes, the money you're going to give, the consideration you're going to have will make for someone. This lady married off at the age of 11. She's not the only child in this world who gets married off at 11. Had 5 children by the time she was 22. Lost one of them. By the time she was 18, she had actually had 4 children, but she had lost one of them because she couldn't breastfeed. Didn't have a high school education. The lady who made a difference was the lady who came to visit her from that organization, heard her dreams. They eventually facilitated for her to go to America. She just didn't go from a village to America just like that. I know it looks like that when you see it there, right? But that's not what happened. In fact, from the time she had that conversation to her going to America was over 8 years when she first met that lady from Heifer, because she had to go through a high school education. It took her 8 years. She was uneducated at that point. She was just reading and writing. It took her 8 years to get your normal high school education diploma, what we call your O-levels in Zimbabwe. For her to do that, she repeated 5 subjects many years. She kept repeating English, maths. She had to have 5, at least 5. In order for you to get a college education in Zimbabwe, university, you have to have at least 5 O-levels. And she had to do those 5 O-levels over and over again. It took her 8 years to eventually get them. And after that, that organization arranged for her and her husband and her children to go to America. Now she goes around the world speaking. She is now a doctor. She's achieved all her goals. On top of it all, when she appeared on that show, Oprah granted her $1.5 million to go and build schools in her village. And she went back and built a school and has since built about 20 schools in Zimbabwe since that time. Now, I share with you this story to show you that you can impact not just one person by your contribution, but you can impact families, villages, hundreds of children. In one school, she has over 600 children. And those schools look beautiful. They have desks. She learned to read and write on a rock. And her dad didn't think it was necessary for her to go to school. And at the age of, from that time when she started reading and using that rock to do her brother's homework, that's how she learned to read and write. She taught herself. And this is not in 1800. This is not in 1950. This was in the 1970s. Now this lady, famous all over the world, now Oprah says it's still her favorite episode is that episode, and she was her favorite guest of all time since she did her show. And when you see that, and when you see what is possible, yes, this can tell you about yourself, reach for your dreams, all that stuff. But what it told me was that I can help somebody make such a huge difference in their life. The lady who came to their village, that organization needed to be sponsored by somebody. for them to go to that village to meet Tererai, they didn't just do it on their own. They needed money from people over here to go and out there so that they can help people there and give someone hope and make someone's dreams come alive. When you see those children in Romania, when you see those children in Guatemala, in Zambia, in DRC, they have dreams. They have dreams, but they don't necessarily have anyone that can help them with those dreams. And some of them, their dreams will remain buried forever in their hearts. She was blessed enough to be able to find someone who would say to her, your dreams can come true, and I'm going to help you make those dreams come true. And now she is a professor teaching in America and has gone all over the world teaching people, written books, and that is because somebody saw it fit to make a difference in her life. Money is not the most important thing in the world. It doesn't make us come alive. It does not make you breathe, but it sure is as close to the most important thing in the world, because without it, a lot of things cannot happen. You can't eat, can't dress. You wouldn't be in this place. We wouldn't be warm if it wasn't for the fact that we pay the bills in this building. And so when you think to give, when you consider the poor, as the Bible says, every single week as you give your tithes and offerings, it used to be on our tithes envelopes, we had, I think we still have, the different sections for what you're giving, right? Youth, you're giving to church building, you're giving to the budget. We always had a section for giving to community and services. We need to go back to seriously laying aside something that we know will make a difference. 50p, yes, it's great. It might make a difference. And if it's all you have, wonderful. But if you can do more, definitely do more. Instead of maybe spending that money on that one thing that you don't really need another extra pair of shoes that you're never going to wear more than once a year. This might be necessary for you. I want to tell you my story. Someone gave her hope. Tererai brought her to America, changed her life and the life of thousands of other children. Not now, even in the future, those schools will stand and those places will always be there for a child to learn and for girls to stop being married off at 11. Now people in her village know that it's important to educate a woman. And they have continued to do that. She stopped a trend that had been passed on from generation. Her grandmother was married as a teenager. Her mother was married off at 12. She was married off at 11. And she didn't want her children to have that. And someone made it possible for that not to happen for her children and for future generation of women and girls. I was brought up by my grandmother. My parents went to war during the liberation struggle. My dad went to war, and he never came back. And this was in the 1970s. I was born in the mid-70s, and when I had no idea there was a war going on. Of course, I was a baby then. And so when I found myself living with my grandmother, and when I was now aware and conscious of my world and what's happening, I had no clue what had happened to my dad. I just knew I was living with my grandmother. And my mom had come back from her marital home after my dad didn't come back from the war. And they said, well, you know, your husband is probably dead and you need to come back. You need to go back to your family. So my mom went back to her family. And then after a couple of years, she remarried. And as it turned out, my stepfather didn't want to live with me because for whatever reason. So it turned out that I had to go and live with my grandmother. I went to live with my grandmother in a place called Kadoma. It's in the Midlands. My grandmother was an entrepreneuring woman. She had a business. She had businesses of her own. She had been a widow since 1965 when my grandfather had died. So she used to look after me and other children that were orphans of the war. Because other children that had come, some of my cousins, their parents had died in Zambia during the war, and we had a bunch of us. Most of the time they came and went, but I stayed with my grandmother until I was about 8 or 9. And at the time my grandmother got sick, she developed cancer of something. I don't know what, even to this day, but she started to get ill. And at that point she decided she needed to find me a home where I could live. and with someone who would be responsible and make sure that I had the lifestyle that she wanted me to have. Now, my grandmother was an independent woman. She took care of herself and she took care of a whole bunch of other people. She made her own money. And she decided this is what she wanted me to be, in a place that was safe. So she bundled me off to my aunt and my uncle, my mother's brother, one of my mother's brothers. My mother was the only girl in her family, and she had 5 brothers. And her third brother, my grandmother took me there, left me there and said, right, this is your new home. You're going to stay here, and this is where you're going to get your education and everything. Of course, I didn't like the idea because I was used to being with my grandmother, so I rebelled against it for a good year or two. I was that child that just made everyone's life hell. I was throwing tantrums. I didn't want to be here. I want to go back to my grandmother's house. But I stayed there. And my aunt, who is my uncle's wife, took me in as her own. She looked after me like her own child. She had a daughter who was about the same age as me. She's a year older than me. We looked the same age, so she used to dress up us up as twins. And to this day, there are people who think we are twins and who do not know that we're not even sisters. And she used to make sure that we were all treated the same. And my aunt was the only Adventist in my entire world. Nobody else in our family is an Adventist. No other family of ours are Adventists today. My aunt, who was married into our family, was an Adventist, took me to church, made sure that I learned everything that I know today, made sure that I had an education that was equivalent to what her children had, made sure to look after me in the best of ways possible. And the reason why I'm able to stand here today is because she was willing to take me in, possibly an orphan. I am now. My mother died in 2005. Took me in, looked after me, took care of all my needs, even if it meant that she had to share her resources from her 4 children and myself. And I can stand here today because she considered my situation. Unlike some of my other aunties were like, no, I don't want to take my husband's relatives in. And you know us in Africa, right? A lot of us Zimbabweans, we fight about this. My husband's bringing his relatives. All his relatives are staying with me. And this is all. I've been in the other side of this equation where I was the relative that came to stay with your husband. And everyone was like, oh, he brings his relatives. And I was that child that if I had not stayed with my aunt, I would have probably ended up in the village with one of my other uncles who married off his daughters at 15. And my grandmother did not want that. I have cousins who got married at 15 and 14 because some of my uncles didn't believe in educating girls. And this uncle of mine was different. And that's what my grandmother saw and said, no, you're not going to go and live with those uncles. You're going to go and live there. And that's how I came to be the woman that I am today. And I wanted to share with you these 2 stories, that lady's story, my story, so you can think and consider that someone out there, when you help them, not only will their life be changed and transformed, but lives of thousands of other people on this earth will be impacted because you chose to make a difference in a child who you don't even know, whose name you will never know, whose face you may never see. But know for sure that when you give, and when you give properly, when you give with consideration, when you give deliberately, when you give prudently, when you give with proper focus and intentionally, when you give with the intention that what I'm planting into this person, whoever they may be, the seed that I am sowing in their life may one day impact millions of people all over the world. You are doing something that will not just make your pocket slightly poor for that minute, but will make the world richer for time immemorial. And that is what you must consider. And as you consider the poor, remember the impact you will have is eternal. May God bless you as you consider the poor today. with all the different things that you can possibly do with ICC, whether you want to sponsor financially, or you want to sponsor once off, or you want to do it monthly, or you want to be an ambassador or a trustee, know this, it's not in vain. Everything you're going to do, it's not in vain. There is a result. You may never see it on earth, but one day you'll be able to see what your consideration did and how your giving made an impact to millions of people on this earth. May God bless you and continue to keep you in Jesus' name.